It's really pissing me off. It's so upsetting. So Hamas has the West's number. It knows exactly how to push buttons. It knows exactly what to do to create dissent and conflict and to ultimately force the Israeli government's hands, force them to back down. Over the last few days, they've been releasing videos of the hostages that they murdered from before they murdered them, to remind the families, Israeli civilians, the world, that they were alive just a few days, moments before the Israeli forces found their bodies. And indeed, they were killed point blank, execution style, just before, within 24 hours, 48 hours of them being found. And they're putting out one a day, video a day. And every time a video hits, the families of the hostages flip out, and I can completely understand them flipping out. And then everybody who supports a deal, just the idea of a deal, I find shocking and horrific. Everybody who supports a deal gets motivated. You see, we need a deal, because if there'd been a deal, they would have been alive. And Netanyahu has to come out, and he's doing this, to his credit, he does a good job. I've always said he presents well. He keeps coming out and has to do one of these dog and pony shows the maps and discusses and explains and why we have to do this and why we have to do that, and why we can't compromise on a deal, and it's just shocking. Imagine if you cut a deal. And in that deal, you leave the Philadelphia corridor, and Hamas now has links into Egypt, and maybe not. Maybe it doesn't use that because everybody's watching over the next year or two. But in 3 years, they dig new tunnels, and they go and they start rearming, and they start reestablishing, and Israel doesn't win. It doesn't achieve its victory because we got a deal. We got hostages back. We got a deal. And he gets 60 live hostages, go back to their families. And that is a wonderful outcome, right? Getting 60 hostages coming back. But then 3 years down the road, or 4 years down the road, or 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road. And that once a deal is struck, and once, everybody's agreed to the deal, Israel might go in and assassinate Sinwar and assassinate this person here, and once in a while strike at Hamas. Israel's not going to go back. It's not going to launch another war. And the world wouldn't support it if it did. Okay, so now you're buying time for Hamas to just get stronger again and inflict another October 7th. And maybe it's not Hamas this time. Maybe it's Hezbollah, which has a much bigger border in the north, which can muster. They say that during October 7th, somewhere 3,000 Gazans, most of them, 3,000 to 5,000 Gazans, mostly those who work for, mostly Hamas fighters, but also just regular Gazans, entered Israel and committed the atrocities that they committed. And they would have kept going if not for Israel ultimately waking up and fighting them and kicking them out. Imagine that happens in the north, and they take 1,000 hostages. Why not? Why not take 1,000 hostages? I mean, who knows what we can compromise, what kind of deal we can cut with Israel if we get 1,000 hostages. I mean, there's no end. Once you negotiate with evil, there is no end to what evil will do. I feel for the families of the hostages. I understand that all they want is the hostages back. And I understand the people who say, Well, Israel should negotiate for the hostages, get them back, and then go in and crush Hamas. If I believed Israel would actually do that, if I believed that the U.S. would support Israel actually doing that, okay, fool Hamas into pretending you're cutting a deal and get those hostages back, fine. But what are the odds of that happening? Zero. Zero. Once they cut a deal, they'll cut a deal, and there will be no going back. It's the same thing as in 2005 when Israel retreated from Gaza and left Gaza and forced people out of their homes and dragged them out of there. Jews who were living in the Gaza Strip. And everybody said, oh, this is good because now if Hamas attacks us, we'll just go in and crush them. So no problem, we'll leave now. And now they won't see it as weakness because we'll crush them anytime they do something. And then Hamas loves missiles and missiles and missiles, and Israel does nothing. And it's clearly a sign of weakness. The same thing happened when Israel left Lebanon. Oh no, we'll go back when we need to. Yeah, right. Look at what's happening right now. So, I don't know. I think you have to go by principle. There are never exceptions. I mean, unless the context is wildly different. You cannot negotiate with terrorists. You cannot negotiate with evil. You can't negotiate with Iran. You cannot negotiate with Hamas. You cannot negotiate with Hezbollah. The only way to achieve peace, the only way to achieve a lasting peace, the only way to secure the lives of Israeli citizens is by destroying Hamas completely and thoroughly. Now, you could say, but Israel didn't do that in the past, and because of that, October 7th happened. Yes, that's why I think Netanyahu is responsible for October 7th. And now it's his job to get those hostages out. But then he's committing all the mistakes that led to October 7th. So, I don't know. It's you cannot negotiate with terrorists. Period. It's unbelievably sad that many of those 60 hostages are going to die. But the principle stands. And the only reason that they are even hostages is because Israel's compromised in the past. It's negotiated with terrorists in the past. Hamas is not to be negotiated with, not to be dealt with, not to be sanctioned. Remember, sanction? We talked about that. Don't sanction Hamas. And when you sit down and negotiate with them, and let's not pretend they're sitting down and negotiating with them, you're sanctioning them, you're legitimizing them as a other side of a negotiation. And there's no walking that back. I mean, unless the character of Israel and the United States changes dramatically and they're willing to fool Hamas by negotiating for the hostage release and then going in and destroying them. But that's not happening. It just will not happen. And Netanyahu, to his credit, is standing up against this. Now, I say this hesitantly only because I think Netanyahu is responsible for October 7th and responsible for the fact that we are now 11 months, today is September 7th, so exactly 11 months, and Hamas is still not being crushed. Still not being crushed. Still hasn't won the war. Still hasn't achieved victory 11 months in. Remember the days of the 6-day war? Granted, this is a difficult war. Granted, this is very tough and international pressure and all the rest. No question. It still should have been over by now. And those hostages should be home. Dead or alive, they should be home. Because Hamas does not exist anymore. And that should have been the mission from day one. And they should have had no holds bar, and they should have just devastated the Hamas and the Gazans. And the fact that they haven't is the price Israel is paying for and will pay for many, many, many years.